after the Vikings lost 31-9 on Sunday to the Detroit Lions, they now have to go onto the road to the Los Angeles Rams as the number 5 seed in the NFC playoffs. What did that do? What did that loss on Sunday Night Football in front of the world, in front of the national audience, what did that do to did it shake your guys' confidence in this team going into the playoffs? And since I know Joe's been the most confident in this team all season long, having them as a double-digit win team when we predicted the schedule before the season started. I'll start with you, Joe. Was your confidence shaken in the Vikings after they got destroyed by the Lions on Sunday?
No, because I don't live in the past, and I don't let the history of this franchise and disappointment affect how I feel about them on a week-to-week basis. I am very Kevin O'Connell locked in 1 week at a time. PJ Fleck would be proud of me. He'd be proud of the Vikings. It's a 1-0 season, and right now the Vikings are 0-0, and they're trying to go 1-0 against the Rams. And I think Kevin O'Connell said it this week a handful of times. They did not know that Puka Nacua was going to play until late in the day. The last time they played on short rest in Los Angeles. They had zero idea. They didn't get to have a full week of a game plan against Matthew Stafford, Jared Verse, Braden Fisk, all these young, talented players for the Rams. And this time is different. He's got a full 7 days to gear up, fire some bullets. There's not going to be, hopefully, any missed weird face mask penalties to negate any potential game-winning drives late. Kevin O'Connell with a full week against his sensei, Sean McVay. This is fantastic. I think it's going to be a really close game, but the Vikings are the better team, and I do believe they will go on the road and get this win.
Will, was your confidence shaken by the way that they lost to Detroit on Sunday?
Maybe a little bit. I wouldn't. I don't want to put too much stock into one game. Even as rough as it was for Sam Darnold, as rough as it was for the Vikings, they were in that game for 3 quarters. Eventually, Jahmyr Gibbs was just too much to handle, and it turned into a bit of a blowout in the fourth. But the defense did what it's done all year. They made plays. They came out with 2 interceptions, a turnover on downs, got to Jared Goff a couple times. Like, you can't really blame them, I don't think, for that game with what they were able to do. Obviously, the Lions are really, truly an elite offense, maybe the best in the league. The Vikings offense didn't hold up their end of the bargain. Sam Darnold just really not accurate. A lot of opportunities in the red zone to Justin Jefferson or to Jordan Addison or whoever it was, and he either didn't see it or didn't pull the trigger on a couple to Addison or just kind of missed Jefferson and other guys a couple times. Jefferson had one in the back of the end zone that he probably could have caught. It was just that kind of game for the Vikings. Not a lot went right. Andrew Van Ginkel dropped what would have been a potential pick six. There were maybe a couple calls in there by the officiating crew that can be debated, but that's a really, really good Detroit Lions team that is, I think if you look at the betting odds, I haven't, but I would assume that they are the favorite to win the Super Bowl because they have looked to me like the best team in the NFL all year. That's a really hard place to play in Ford Field. I was there. It was very, very loud. So I don't think that we should suddenly take a team that was 14-2 coming into that game, had won 9 in a row, and lose too much faith in them. But with that said, going on the road to play Matthew Stafford, who has won a Super Bowl, Puka Nacua, Cooper Kupp. Joe mentioned their defensive line with Braden Fiske and Jared Verse and Byron Young, Kobe Turner. They have some really good pieces on this team. It's a Rams team that has a negative point differential on the year, but they were 1-4 and I think like minus 45 before their bye. And then fully healthy, ripped off a 9-2 stretch with like a plus 30 point differential. So it's going to be a tough place. It's going to be a tough game to go win for the Vikings. I do, like Joe, think that they are the better team. And I do ultimately think that they're going to win, but I'm only kind of cautiously optimistic about that, just with what Stafford and that group was able to do against Brian Flores' defense last time. Just the postseason experience of Stafford and Sean McVay, I think, matters. I think this is a tough game for the Vikings, but I do think that they're going to be really, really prepared for this one. I don't think losing to the Lions is going to linger in their heads or anything. They'll shake it off. Their only goal is to go 1-0 this week. And I do ultimately think that they're going to get that done.
Tony?
Yeah, I think my biggest takeaway from the Sunday's game was that the Lions are better than I thought they were. I mean, I thought they were a Super Bowl contender, but The injuries obviously raised a lot of questions, I think, for their potential in the playoffs. And I think Sunday proved that they should be the favorites, I think, to win the Super Bowl. And my opinion on the Vikings didn't change. And I kind of going off what Will and Joe said heading into this game, on paper, I do think the Vikings are a better team, but it's even though LA doesn't have a raucous environment by any means, it's hard to go on the road in any NFL game, especially in the playoffs, and pick up a win. But my outlook on the Vikings and overall feeling on what they can do in the playoffs really didn't change. And I think the interesting aspect on this now is if they do get past the Rams this week, which there's interesting storylines with the KOC Sean McVay connection, then it could set up another matchup with the Lions next week. So playing a team that quickly in the span of 3 weeks, then playing them twice will be interesting and an interesting storyline to look ahead to. But I think everything that was on the table last week for this Vikings team is still there. And I don't think last week's game changed my opinion too much.
It's interesting because I believe, Tony, you were the only one who said of the four of us in the staff predictions on Vikings on SI that said that the Vikings will get to the Super Bowl in our predictions of the playoffs. So how do you guys still view this team as a Super Bowl contender? I know we just talked about our confidence in this team. Do you still view them as a Super Bowl contender with how the playoffs have shaken out and going in as the number 5 seed, Will?
I mean, I think they are to an extent. The path would have been so much rosier and easier to kind of see had they won that game on Sunday night, which they had all kinds of chances to do, final scoreline aside, to get that bye, to get the guaranteed home game in the divisional round and a home game in the NFC title game if you were to get there. It would have just looked a lot better for their chances. Now, I don't think they're dead by any means, because this is a 14-3 football team that has a lot of talent on both sides of the ball, has two of the best coaches in the NFL, in my opinion, on their respective sides of the ball. I'm not going to count them out in any game, certainly not this week. And if they have to go to Detroit in the divisional round, I wouldn't count them out there. That would be really tough because that Lions team is unbelievably good. But the Vikings would absolutely have a chance. They've had a chance both times they've played the Lions this year. It's hard to beat a team 3 times is a saying people like to go to. And if they have to go to Philly or whatever it is, assuming obviously they have to win this game first. But yeah, I think this Vikings team has shown all year that they can play against anybody. They can compete in any game, home, road, good team. They can sometimes let bad teams hang around too. But they are still a Super Bowl contender. They're not in that top tier with the Lions, Eagles, Bills, Chiefs, Ravens. I don't know if you want to throw anybody else in there. That's probably the top 5. I wouldn't put the Vikings in there largely because of their seed. But yeah, would it shock me if they win 3 games and go to the Super Bowl? It wouldn't. I think it's within the realm of possibility. And Vikings fans are going to spend Sunday hoping that the Commanders and Packers can both pull off upsets. Because then that would set up the one situation where the Vikings get a home game in the divisional round.
So how good are the Rams actually? Because I'm looking at their schedule and I see they've won like 8 of 11 or something like that, 9 of 11 actually, to finish the season after starting 1-4. But okay, let's look at who they've beaten. They beat the Raiders by 5 points. Yippee! They beat the Vikings at home on short rest when Christian Darrisaw was hurt at the half. I'll give them that one, but that's not a normal week, so it doesn't really count. They beat Seattle in overtime. Seattle didn't have DK Metcalf. Yippee. They weren't playing well at the time either. That was when Seattle was really down. They lost to a horrible Dolphins team at home. Yippee. They went to New England and barely won. That's not impressive. They got absolutely smoked by Saquon Barkley and the Eagles at home. That's telling. They went to New Orleans, only won by a touchdown. They did score 44 against the Bills, but they allowed 42. Not impressive. They beat the 49ers, but only scored 12 points. They beat New York, that's the Jets, and they only scored 19 points. And then they beat Arizona, and they only scored 13 points before losing to Seattle and resting their starters in Week 18. But in the last 3 games started by Matthew Stafford, they've averaged like 14.5 points. I don't know what is so scary about this other than the fact that the Vikings are going somewhere where they lost earlier this season. But you 100% have to throw that out the window because, like we've said over and over and over again, Thursday Night Football is a wacky thing, and nobody can predict the outcome regardless of how good or how bad a team is going into that matchup. The Vikings are a superior team. They've played a superior schedule. They're going to beat the Rams and go into the second round. Whether they go to Detroit or they're hosting a game next week, that's yet to be determined. But rest assured, guys like Quentin Lake who say, "Hey, we don't want the Vikings to overlook us. We're offended by Dan Campbell saying, 'Hey, Vikings, we'll see you in 2 weeks.'" Be offended. Nobody takes you seriously because of your resume. It's not that impressive.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of agree with everything that Joe and Will said. That I still think the Vikings are the third best team in the NFC. Having to play potentially their path to the Super Bowl all being on the road limits their chances, and I think it'd be naive to not say that. But yeah, I mean, if the Commanders and Packers pull off upsets, they could have a home game in the divisional round. But I don't think that last week's game should just completely eliminate the whole season. If it goes the other way, then they might be hosting the Lions in the divisional round, which obviously would give them a better chance of winning. But I still think they can compete with any of those teams. They're definitely going to have to play their best football and not a game like they did on Sunday. But they're going to be competitive in these games. And like Joe said, the Rams don't really scare me too much. And I think they might be a year away from being a Super Bowl contender because they have a lot of young pieces on that roster. So do the Vikings and so do any team. And you don't want to discount Sean McVay, who's a Super Bowl winning coach. But yeah, it just they got to go week by week. And like Joe said, I think I like their chances this week against the Rams.
I know looking to. Oh, go ahead, Will.
I was just gonna say I don't know. I think we should be a little bit careful about just writing off the Rams. I know it was a Thursday night game earlier this season. I don't think you can just completely throw those out because both teams are on this short week. And what Stafford was able to do with Kupp and Nakua, and I don't love the Brian Flores going, "Oh, we weren't ready for Puka Nakua. We didn't think he was going to play." Like, so you weren't prepared to play good defense against good receivers?
Well,
like, I don't really know what that means. How would you go in with a better plan?
Let me fire this one at you because I think Jared Goff and the Lions in the week before that, October 24th loss, 4 days before, is a really good example because Blake Cashman didn't play in either one of those losses for Minnesota, and Goff averaged like 11 and a half yards per attempt in that game, and he was absolutely shredding the defense over the middle of the field from start to finish. And then when they met in Week 18 in Detroit, Goff averaged like 7.5 yards per attempt, and he wasn't nearly as effective. I mean, the Lions dominated that game 31-9, but we all know how close this game was. And if it wasn't for, some red zone disasters led by Sam Darnold having his worst game arguably of the season, it's not a 22-point loss for Minnesota. It might be a road victory, the number one seed, a first-round bye, and an NFC North championship. So the defense came to play in round 2. And I think, Jonathan, you've mentioned this a few times this year, that when Brian Flores gets a second crack at a team, he tends to really shut them down. I think Jordan Love's a good example of that. Caleb Williams is a good example of that. The first time around, well, Jordan Love had a huge, 12 or 13-minute stretch in the second half after Green Bay got way behind, and he lit the Vikings up. And the second time, it wasn't quite as impressive. The defense really responded, and I think against Goff, they did it, and I think they'll do the same thing against Matthew Stafford.
I think I absolutely think this Vikings defense is very, very good. I've been high on them all year. They make plays. They disrupt the quarterback. They come up with takeaways. They've done it every single game this year, at least one takeaway, multiple takeaways in a lot of games. I just think the two things about the Rams where I don't project the Vikings to go into this game and just romp on the road. It's possible if they play their A game, they certainly could. But I think this will be a close game that comes down to the wire, largely because Stafford and McVay have that big game experience that not a ton of players on the Vikings roster have. Certainly not Sam Darnold. And then defensively, I think that's a group that could pose some real issues. Jared Verse You talk about him being a rookie, but he's like 25. He was 4th in the NFL, according to PFF, with 77 pressures this year. He is already an elite player. And then they've got 3 other guys in Turner, Fiske, and Young who are between 44 and 54 pressures. That's like having a Jonathan Grenard and then like 3 almost Andrew Van Ginkel types just based on pressure numbers. And Van Ginkel obviously does a lot more than just rush the quarterback. But Cam Robinson and Blake Brandel did not have good games against the Detroit Lions. Garrett Bradbury, too, on the left side of the Vikings offensive line. Dalton Reisner has been good lately, but still maybe a little inconsistent earlier this season. So that, I think, is really one of the big areas to watch because the Vikings need to protect Sam Darnold if he's going to have a good shot at bouncing back from what was one of his worst games of the year in Detroit. So I think the Vikings are the better team. I think they win this game. But I'm not willing to say that they are just going to go into LA and win with a B- game. I think they're going to have to show up and play really well on both sides of the ball.
You mentioned Darnold there, and I know a lot of people roll their eyes about looking forward to that decision that the Vikings have to make because there's a playoff run in the near future here, and that in the immediate that we should be focusing on. But that is a topic of discussion that gets a lot of attention because it is a big decision for the Vikings to make this offseason. How important is a playoff run for Sam Darnold to stay in Minnesota next season? Or do you think that decision's already been made because of the play he had over the entirety of the NFL regular season? Is there some kind of importance weighted on that decision based on how he plays in the playoffs, Will?
Yeah, it'll matter. I think it'll especially matter after what happened on Sunday night. Darnold had been really, really good for the vast majority of the Vikings' 9-game win streak. I mean, after that Jacksonville game, that little 3 or 4 game stretch he had in the middle of the season, he's been so good this year. 13 games above a 100 passer rating. Big reason why they were 14-2 and then 14-3. Deserved Pro Bowl selection. So I think he's had a really good year, but that Lions game, it just made you pause a little bit and hesitate and say, okay, what was going on there? Like, was that just he simply missed the throws, like he said over and over in his post-game press conference? Was there some mental element once he missed a couple early and then just couldn't seem to get back on track? This playoff game and perhaps multiple playoff games, I think is going to really matter, not just for the Vikings, but for his market across the league when he hits free agency in March. If he does not play well again and the Vikings are one and done in LA, I think he might have cost himself a lot of money based on what he was projected to make before the Lions game. But if he bounces back and looks like the 2024 version of Sam Darnold we saw all year, he's still, I think, going to get a really big contract because of the lack of other great options in free agency and the draft. I mean, I'm sure we'll talk plenty about the Vikings decision. My position lately has kind of been, I think Kwesi Adolfo-Mensah is going to do what he did with Kirk Cousins last year and offer Sam Darnold a deal that he thinks makes sense for the Vikings and then not budge on that. And if Sam Darnold wants to take that, welcome back. If he doesn't and he wants to chase the absolute biggest check from the Atlanta Falcons or whoever, it wouldn't be the Atlanta Falcons this time, obviously, because they have Michael Penix. But
might be.
Some
They're
team
pretty
out
weird.
there,
Yeah.
Hey, you never know. Some team out there, then see you later, and we're rolling with J.J. McCarthy and Daniel Jones or whoever. That's
I
kind of
think
my
that's such a
position
good
on it.
take, Will. I think you nailed that. I think that's exactly it. I think Kwesi says here's 3 years, $100 million, the Baker Mayfield staple. Take it or leave it. You know, they have all the leverage because they have a first-round pick who everybody loves, sitting there.
Everybody wants to trade for, apparently.
Yeah, who everybody might want to trade for. Now, the Darnold decision might get easier if you get 2 first-round picks for Kevin O'Connell, because then you can just build around Darnold with more first-round picks, right?
You got Darnold, but then not the guy who helps make him good.
Made him good. But here's the thing.
And Josh McCown's going to go to the Bears too.
Yeah, but if you're the
Jets.
Vikings and you have even an ounce of doubt that Sam Darnold would be good without Kevin O'Connell, punt him instantly. instantly, because he's going to have to make plays on his own in certain situations. And Kevin O'Connell's there's so many scenarios where you can't look at a player and say, this guy is going to take me to the Super Bowl, but only if he's attached to this head coach. Who wants that? You know, if you looked at Patrick Mahomes and you said, okay, Patrick Mahomes, go to Cincinnati. Could you lead that team to a Super Bowl with Zach Taylor? Does the head coach matter with Patrick Mahomes? I don't think it does. And if your quarterback needs that head coach to succeed, I think you're really, really limiting your potential ceiling, because there's going to be a lot of downfall games where you got to bring him back from the dead, kind of like against Jacksonville, kind of like against Detroit. And if that's going to happen a few times over the course of the season, it's a threat to happen in the playoffs. And that you cannot have if you have aspirations to win the big game.
Well, Joe, do you think Tom Brady wouldn't have been as good with Bill Belichick? I think any dynasty in the recent memory has a good coach and a good quarterback.
Yeah, no, that's certain. That's certain. But Tom Brady went to Tampa Bay and won a Super Bowl too. So it's like he could go anywhere and win a Super Bowl with the right roster around him. Coaching is very important. But if it's the only way a player can succeed is to be with the right coach, that's not a good sign. You need a guy who can go into any environment and win.
I'd be fascinated to see if Darnold doesn't come back this year, or let's say if he does for the next season or two and then eventually goes somewhere else, like how he'll look without Kevin O'Connell. Because
how would he look with Kevin Stefanski?
Yeah, I mean it's a very good question. I don't think that all of Darnold's success this season should be totally attributed to Kevin O'Connell. I think that's selling Darnold short.
Yeah,
because he's still been the one out there making these throws and working through his progressions and making plays with his athleticism outside the pocket. So it's just a fascinating kind of dynamic to me, like how much credit is Darnold has just really realized his potential, how much of that goes to O'Connell, and I think we might find out at some point, whether next year or in the future. And it wouldn't surprise me if he plays well somewhere else. It would surprise me, I think, if he basically ever has a season this good again, but you know, we'll see.
Lastly here, quickly, what's one thing you want to see from this team on Monday night in Los Angeles to make you feel comfortable about their chances in the playoffs of getting to the Super Bowl, of if they have to face the Lions again, feeling better about this team going into that match, going into a potential rematch with the Lions? What's one thing you each want to see from this team on Monday night, Will? I'll start with you, then Joe, then Tony.
Well, beyond winning
beyond
the
winning,
game,
obviously, yes.
yes. No, I get your question. I would say, I mean, I touched on it a little earlier, but the offensive line being able to hold up a little bit, and I think that there's two elements to that. It's protecting Sam Darnold, not giving up as many pressures as they did against the Lions, which part of it was the O-line, part of it was Darnold being gun-shy at times and holding onto the ball too long. But the offensive line also needs to show up in the run game, and I wrote about this today, Vikings on SI, how the Vikings just haven't been able to run the ball down near the goal line. I think almost 3/4 of their runs inside the 10, the running back was hit at the line, and half of those ended up going for no gain or a loss of yards. They need to be able to run the ball into the end zone when they get down there, so they're not asking Sam Darnold to throw 3-4 straight times in the low red zone like they did a couple times against the Lions. So I want to see the offensive line show up and play well and rise to the level of this challenge that I've talked about a little bit against this Rams front four. Protect Darnold, run the football. Aaron Jones averaged 3.1 yards per carry in that first game against the Rams. So big test for the offensive line, specifically looking at the left side of Robinson, Brandell, Bradbury, who struggled in Detroit.
Yeah, for me, it's just Sam Darnold's accuracy. I give him a pass. I don't know that any quarterback could have succeeded against Detroit. You look at the numbers from PFF in that game. He was hurried 33 times. That's the second most hurries the Lions have put on an opposing quarterback this season. I think they hurried Geno Smith back in week 2 or 3 37 times. And they had Aiden Hutchinson and Aleem McNeil and the entire supporting cast before everybody got hurt. The fact that that defensive unit hurried Darnold 33 times, hit him 9 times, sacked him twice. I mean, that's nuts, man. Darnold never gets hit like that. And I don't know how many quarterbacks, Tom Brady, Patrick Mahomes, could have really survived in that type of environment. It was like playing in a hailstorm. I mean, good luck finding, anybody open downfield, and good luck completing passes when you're uncomfortable, your feet aren't set, you're sweating bullets, your eyes are dancing all over the place. That had to have been a horrific experience for Darnold, and I'll give him a pass on that one. So if he's protected a little bit better, I would expect that he's back to, MVP caliber Darnold that he was all season. If that's the case, the Rams are in trouble.
Yeah, I think it would be easy to just point at Sam Darnold, but kind of going off what Joe said, what I guess noticed in Sunday's game was like the timing and confidence that he had on his throws. It seemed like he was second guessing a lot of stuff, especially in the red zone. There were a couple times that Jordan Addison was wide open. It just seemed like he was a step behind. And I think it just like timing with his receivers just seemed like it was way off, and it seemed like he was second guessing every single throw almost. And it compared to Jared Goff, who it would just be like a smooth 3-5 step drop and then he'd throw. It seemed like Darnold didn't have that same rhythm. And if he's able to find that, I think the accuracy problems will be solved. So he just needs to come out firing, because that's what he had been doing all year. And I think on Sunday he just kind of second guessed him.
Looking forward to it, guys. Go read their coverage over at Vikings, Twins, Timberwolves, and Gophers on SI. Hit the subscribe button to the channel. It does help us get found. Also notifies you every time we post a new video here to the Bring Me the Sports YouTube channel. Appreciate you all watching. Appreciate you all sticking through our holiday break, but we are back. We'll start posting regular daily videos right back here on the channel. Like I said, be sure to hit subscribe, and we'll talk to you tomorrow.